When you think of Haas F1 team, what is the first person that comes to your mind? Is it perhaps Roman Grosjean or Kevin Magnussen, the team's most famous and often controversial lineup? Is it Gene Haas, the mysterious American owner of the team? Is it maybe even William Story, whose short but certainly not sweet partnership with Haas made them a laughingstock in 2019? Or is it Guenther Steiner, team principal up until the start of 2024 and a character that has slowly made himself the face of Haas? Ever since the release of Drive to Survive in 2019, we got an insight into the unabashed team principal, who had an extreme lack of filter on and off the track. Whether it be with driver lineup, team personnel or media, he spoke his mind. This made him quite a popular character within the paddock. However, his personality hid his major blushes as an actual team principal, such as Sargent using his GOAT status to hide the fact that he's shit. So, why did it take so long for the team principal to be removed from his post? Well, in this video, we will explore his career as a figure in F1, his time leading Haas F1 team, and why it was necessary to remove Guenther Steiner for the benefit of the team. And as always, please like and subscribe. It's only 2 buttons and it really helps the algorithm deliver my videos to new people. So hello everyone, I'm TMWF1, and let's see if Gene Haas really was right to sack Guenther Steiner. Guenther Steiner was born on April 7th, 1965 in a small town in South Tyrol, Italy. I have probably butchered that. I actually had no idea that Guenther was Italian. I don't know why, but I just thought he was like German or something. Growing up in a region known for its beautiful landscapes and diverse culture, Steiner developed an early fascination with cars and motorsports. His parents encouraged these interests, and he often spent time tinkering with machines and learning about automotive engineering. Steiner pursued a degree in mechanical engineering at the University of Bolzano. After completing his studies, he sought to make his mark in the racing world. He began his career in the early 1990s, initially working in various roles within the motorsport industry. His first significant position was with the German racing team, Joest Racing, where he gained valuable experience in both engineering and team management. In 1997, Steiner managed ProDrive's All-Star Rally team, winning the European Rally Championship with Christoph Bro, I can't pronounce that name. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to put that on screen right now just so you can see how to pronounce that name, because no. Let's move on. And in 1998, M Sport recruited him as project manager. In 2000, he was promoted to director of engineering, where he worked under the Ford World Rally team, alongside drivers Colin McRae and Carlos Sainz Sr. He ultimately secured consecutive runner-up finishes into the 2000 and 2001 seasons. This earned him a lot of recognition within the motorsport world, and Jaguar, owned by Ford at the time, hired him. Guenther Steiner was hired by Jaguar to lead the team as team principal in 2001. He was appointed to help steer the team in the right direction after a mediocre debut year for the Jaguar F1 team. He was sought after by former team principal Niki Lauda, who actually wanted him to be managing director until Niki Lauda was given the job instead. His first year at the helm of Jaguar was eventful, as management unsuccessfully tried to recruit genius designer Adrian Newey from McLaren, which destabilised the already fragile team even further. The highlight of the 2001 season for Jaguar and Guenther was Irvine finishing P3 at the Monaco Grand Prix. The Jaguar team finished P8, an improvement from P9 in 2000, but still nowhere near the results they were expecting. And unfortunately, despite their constructors' position improving from the next year, finishing P7, it was a tumultuous time for Guenther at Jaguar. Ford started to have issues, with running costs at the team becoming a major problem, coupled with Eddie Irvine only scoring 8 points courtesy of a podium in Monza and Pedro De La Rosa's inabilities to score any points. The writing was on the wall for the whole team. Upon the conclusion of the 2002 season, Niki Lauda and 70 other Jaguar employees were fired from the team, citing that a rebuild was needed. This occurred on November 26. On the 5th of December, Jaguar announced that Guenther Steiner was to be replaced by David Pitchforth. Jaguar stated that Steiner had done nothing wrong, but he needed to be replaced as part of the rebuilding process, and that Pitchforth would take the groundwork Steiner had made and take it to new heights. Now, did he make any form of promise on his word? No. Under Pitchforth's leadership, Jaguar had a best finish of P7 in the constructors and never claimed a podium, being fired in 2004 when the Jaguar team decided to put itself up for sale. It was eventually bought out by extreme sports merchant and energy drink company, Red Bull. Speaking of Red Bull, they needed someone to fill their technical operations director spot after yet another overhaul of the Milton Keynes-based team. Guenther duly accepted and joined Red Bull in 2005. Over that year, despite finishing 7th like its predecessor, Red Bull's season was a success that year. They amassed 34 points, mostly due to the brilliance of David Coulthard, but this was more points than Jaguar had scored in both 2003 and 2004. It was an impressive showing from Guenther in his first year at Red Bull, and he had laid impressive groundwork for him and Red Bull to build on. So naturally, for 2006, he was fired. Why do people keep doing this? First it was Williams with Hülkenberg and Damon Hill, and now Red Bull have done the same thing. I don't get it. Luckily for Red Bull, they had the best excuse of all time, as they managed to somehow poach Adrian Newey from the clutches of Ron Dennis and McLaren, a feat thought near impossible at the time. I did exaggerate over the firing of Steiner. He actually jumped before he was pushed, observing that the F1 team was overcrowded. The owner of Red Bull, Dietrich Mateschitz, approached him to establish a Red Bull NASCAR team in the USA. Steiner agreed, and until 2008, he was the technical director of Team Red Bull in NASCAR. He achieved modest success, but nothing special, leaving after 3 years in charge. At that point, it seemed that a career not just in F1, but in motorsport itself, was over. Upon leaving, he co-founded a composites manufacturing company, aptly named Fiberworks Composites, a company aimed at making parts for motorsport vehicles to improve their performances in their respective championships. He seemed to be done with F1. In 2009, whilst the short-lived US F1 project, an attempt to bring an all-American team onto the grid in F1, was under development, I wonder where I've seen that before, Guenther Steiner was contacted by the co-owner of the successful NASCAR team, Stewart Haas Racing. His name was Gene Haas, and in true American fashion, he met Steiner at a steakhouse. What the fuck is a kilometer? Haas had decided not to invest in the US F1 project, citing that he would like to enter his own team in F1, with the chassis and engine being sourced by other companies. This would later turn out to be Dallara and Ferrari. After careful consideration, Guenther accepted the proposal, and plans were set in motion to get the team on the grid. Steiner was keen hiring team staff, developing partnerships with Dallara and Ferrari, and on the 14th of April 2014, Steiner was announced to be the team principal for the newly formed Haas F1 team. Towards the end of the 2014 season, it was apparent that the Marussia F1 team would go into administration, following money problems and the tragic incident of Jules Bianchi that resulted in his passing in 2015. Haas would later buy the factory of the team in December 2014, using it as a base of operations based in Banbury, Oxfordshire. Come 2015, and Haas would announce that it was to compete in F1 in the 2016 season with fast but error-prone Romain Grosjean and youngster Esteban Gutierrez, shaking down its new car at the post-season test in Abu Dhabi in December 2015. Guenther was finally back in F1. Let's see how he did in his first few years in charge. P6. That is where Romain Grosjean finished after 57 laps of racing at the 2016 Australian Grand Prix. Despite starting in P18, he managed to make his way through the chaos to finish P6. Unfortunately, the same could not be said about his teammate, who was involved in a horror crash with Fernando Alonso at a speed of 190 mph. Thankfully, Alonso walked away with minor injuries and Gutierrez was unhurt. Grosjean ended up benefiting from the subsequent red flag and showed great pace to bring it home in P6. He was elated after the checkered flag with this radio message.
Checkered flag, Romain, checkered flag, absolutely amazing, dude. Guys, listen to me. This is a win for us. This is a win. Unbelievable for everyone. Unbelievable. I don't even know where we finished. Unbelievable.
Haas had managed to score points on debut, the first team built from the ground up to do so since Toyota in 2002. It was an amazing start as a team principal for Steiner. Little did he know that it would get even better at the Bahrain Grand Prix. Grosjean managed to qualify P9, getting into Q3, but didn't manage to set a lap thanks to the abomination that was the qualifying elimination format in the first 3 rounds of 2016. Gutierrez would qualify a respectable P13. Before the start of the race, Sebastian Vettel had an engine failure on the formation lap, meaning that Grosjean would start P8 and Gutierrez P12. On the first lap, chaos ensued as 7 drivers, 5 who were ahead of Grosjean, made contact with each other. The most notable collision was the 2 future teammates, Bottas and Hamilton, with Hamilton dropping to P9 as a result. This left Grosjean P6 at the end of lap 1. Bottas was then given a drive-through penalty for the turn 1 incident, and Button retired with engine issues, briefly lifting Grosjean to P4 on lap 11 before Hamilton overtook him in the dominant WO7. Grosjean didn't just sit there and do nothing though, overtaking Massa and keeping pace with the top 4. He then boxed for 25 seconds. Usually I would slander the team for something like this, but it was to replace the left wheel nut, which had the team not done so would have meant that he would have to retire. I wonder if we'll see this again. Once Grosjean came back out of the pit, he was P8 behind Kvyat and Massa, who were in faster cars. So Grosjean, being the absolute chad he is, overtakes them both and catches and overtakes Max Verstappen to finish P5. This marked the best start for a debutant team since Shadow in 1973, for those of us who remember. Gutierrez unfortunately retired with a brake failure. To the outside eye, this was the American dream reincarnate, and that Haas and Steiner were absolute geniuses. Unfortunately, Haas proceeded to fall off harder than Norris's popularity in F1. They scored points in only 3 more races, with a P8 in Russia, P7 in Austria, and a P10 at their home race in Kota, all courtesy of Grosjean. The lackluster car development from Dallara was compounded by the inept ability of Gutierrez in the Haas, failing to score any points compared to Grosjean's 29, and he managed to finish 21st in the standings. Thankfully, Grosjean finished 13th and single-handedly dragged Haas to P8 in the standings. What a guy. Despite the fall-off, it seemed that Haas was pointing in the right direction, spearheaded by Steiner. It was a good first year in charge for Guenther, as he had made a platform for the team to work and expand on. For 2017, Guenther had made the decision to drop Esteban Gutierrez and brought in Kevin Magnussen as his replacement, forming the iconic Haas duo who was part of Haas for 4 years. The VF17 was very much an inspiration of the 2016 Ferrari, particularly prevalent in its front wing design. This was a feature that would go on to be quite apparent in the later years of Haas. Steiner was looking to build on the good impression that they had made in 2016, and they made the perfect start as Grosjean qualified in P6 at the season-opening Australian Grand Prix, out-qualifying the Red Bull of Ricciardo. Unfortunately, both Haases retired in the race. It only took 3 races for Magnussen to outscore his predecessor's efforts, finishing P8 at the Bahrain Grand Prix. The 2017 Haas was much more consistent in terms of pace and points finishes, with Haas claiming their first double points finish at Monaco and another at Japan. They sat in P6 for most of 2017, showing consistency for the first half of the season. Unfortunately, the car dropped off in pace in the second half of 2017, and the replacement of Jolyon Palmer with an actually competent driver, Carlos Sainz, meant that Renault overtook Haas in the constructors for P6. What's worse, the race before he left, Sainz finished P4 at the Singers' Corps Grand Prix, which ultimately cost Haas P7 in the constructors as well, finishing 6 points behind Toro Rosso and 10 behind Renault in P8 with 47 points. Despite this setback and what seemed like a stagnation in form to the naked eye, this season was a success in my eyes, if you consider the pace of the car and the fact that it wasn't just Grosjean scoring points, but Magnussen as well. The duo finished P13 and P14, with Grosjean edging out Magnussen. With Grosjean finishing with him coming, he was ahead of Magnussen. Despite the lackluster finishing position, things were still very much optimistic for the American team, and their efforts would be rewarded in 2018. When the VF18 was unveiled, competitors immediately noticed that it was a carbon copy of the SF70H, the 2017 Ferrari. While some called for an investigation, it fell on deaf FIA ears. Guenther Steiner told the media that he felt confident about their 2018 challenger, and that he had only bought parts from Ferrari that the FIA approved. At the 2018 Open in Australia, Haas had once again had a stellar qualifying performance, but this time, it wasn't just one car on the pace. Magnussen and Grosjean had managed to qualify P5 and P6 on a grid where the top 3 teams usually locked up the first 3 rows. In part, it was thanks to Bottas' crash in his first run in Q3. Either way, it was an amazing qualifying for the team, their best in F1 thus far. As the lights went out, Magnussen managed to overtake Verstappen at the start, taking P4. Verstappen wasn't too happy about this and tried to retake P4, but ended up spinning due to the aura of the Dane. This left Magnussen and Grosjean in P4 and P5, which was amazing for the team. But unfortunately, we have to talk about the biggest fumble I've seen since I made a video on Lando Norris. On lap 21, Magnussen enters the pits and changes to soft tyres. Everything seems fine until...
Failure guys, suspension failure.
The Haas pit crew had failed to attach his wheel on properly, causing Magnussen to retire from P4, which would have been Haas's best finishing position. All hope now resided on Grosjean to bring the car home and still get a decent haul of points. Grosjean pitted on lap 24 and came back into the race, ready to save Haas. Grosjean had the exact same problem as Magnussen, within the space of 4 laps. After the race, Steiner was quoted that they went from looking like rock stars to looking like a bunch of wankers, and to be honest, he was right. A fumble of a haul of points that would have been vital to Haas' season. Luckily, Haas had actually built a very decent midfield car. However, it was not Grosjean, but Magnussen that stepped up and provided the majority of the point scoring finishes. Grosjean began to lose credibility in the team, with his multitude of crashes and his lackluster performances on track, whereas Magnussen would equal Haas' best ever finish a week after the disappointment of Australia, finishing P5 at the 2018 Bahrain Grand Prix. Grosjean failed to score any points until the Austrian Grand Prix. In qualifying, Grosjean managed to qualify P6, out-qualifying Ricciardo with Magnussen in P8. The race ended up being absolute chaos, with both Mercedes cars retiring with gearbox failures, Ricciardo retiring from the podium, and a 3-way battle for the lead. Eventually, Verstappen won the race, with the 2 Ferraris finishing on the podium, and Romain Grosjean managed to finish in P4 with Magnussen in P5. This is, to this day, Haas's best ever finishing position and the most amount of points scored on a race weekend, avenging Australia 2018. Grosjean finally woke up in 2018, finishing in the points 6 times in the final 11 races, with Magnussen spearheading Haas to P5 in the World Drivers' Championship with a total of 93 points. They finished 30 points off Renault in P4, and this is the highest position that Haas have finished to this day. There is a tiny asterisk next to their P5 finish, as the Force India outfit were put into administration and got bought out over the Belgian Grand Prix, essentially being the same team. Unfortunately, the points were reset, and they ended up finishing P7, whereas the tally of points that they accumulated over the season would have put them in P5, if not for the administration. Ignoring that, this was still an amazing result for the team of Haas's size, and Guenther had managed to pilot this small team to the top half of the table. There was a very real chance that they could aim for top 4 next season. Everything was looking bright. And then, 2019 happened. At the beginning of 2019, Haas announced that they were bringing a new title sponsor on board, in the form of an energy drinks company. Had Haas formed a partnership with Red Bull? Monster Energy? No. They announced their new sponsor, a drinks company by the name of Rich Energy. The owner of the drinks company was William Story, eccentric drinks mogul who tried to buy out Force India in the year prior but failed. Despite hardly any people having heard of the man, it was still good to see Haas get their first ever title sponsor on board. The VF19 was expected to be an evolution of the VF18, using 2018 Ferrari DNA, and Haas felt confident, cocky even, that they could build on their 2018 form to push for a top 4 best of the rest spot. And once again, at the Australian Grand Prix, it looked like smooth sailing as Magnussen had qualified P7 and had a great race to finish P6. Grosjean, on the other hand, had a similar weekend to Australia 2018, retiring due to a pit stop error which saw a damaged wheel nut forced him to retire. Still though, the pace of the car looked arguably better than it did in 2018 with that first race. Unfortunately, that would be the best result of Haas that season. And the reason? Well, Haas had developed a problem that will halt their car development until the present day: tyre degradation. The 2019 Haas was actually quite competent in qualifying, with 17 Q3 appearances across both cars and a highest qualifying position of P5, courtesy of Kevin Magnussen at the Austrian Grand Prix. But the tyre degradation was so bad that the Haas cars usually found themselves dropping out of the points in under 10 laps. Steiner stated that this was not the case in Australia due to long straights and a lack of proper corners, affecting the tyre's heat cycle less compared to other tracks. Alongside this, drivers Magnussen and Grosjean clashed multiple times on track, with their collisions at the British Grand Prix ending both their races, producing the famous Guenther clip that most people know him by.
What was that?
Kevin just fucking smashed the door. That's not acceptable.
Fucking hell. He's not fucking doing that to me, you know? He does not fuck smash my door. Tell him that.
And to top it all off, remember that new title sponsor Haas had signed with, and the owner, William Story? Yeah, they failed to pay Haas the $30 million that they were promised at the start of the season. Story literally clowned on Haas whilst being the title sponsor of the team, and Rich Energy was sued by White Bikes over the plagiarism of their logo. Story fought this in court, saying that he never knew that their logo was similar to White Bikes.
What? Nah, I never knew that.
Eventually, Haas terminated their sponsorship during the Italian Grand Prix, ending a saga that honestly deserves its own video. Such was the mess of it. Haas finished in P9, their worst finish since entering the sport so far, and the two Haas drivers finished in P16 and P18 respectively. The wheels were starting to fall off the Mustang, and things most definitely did not prove during the global pandemic in 2020. It was just the beginning of something horrible. Haas suffered a fair bit more under the pandemic than most teams, not being a manufacturer or Red Bull, and their development was shunted, especially with the problems that it suffered the year prior. What's even worse, the Ferrari engine was found to be illegal due to a loophole that Ferrari had found with the fuel injection system that was discovered in late 2019. To avoid punishment, Ferrari agreed to alter its engine to make sure the loophole was closed, and thus went from an overpowered engine to an iron-deficient hunk of metal that goes on hunger strikes from time to time. As well as this, the car was inept in the amount of grip that produced due to its designs sharing DNA from the 2019 Ferrari, who relied on its powerful engine. Now that the advantage of that engine was null and void, the car essentially turned into a boat in 2020. Finally, the car was no longer quick in qualifying but slow in the race. Now, the car wasn't quick at all. There were multiple times where Haas were the slowest car on track, and the unchanged driver lineup could do little about it. They scored points only twice, P10 at Hungary for Magnussen and P9 at Germany for Grosjean. Steiner felt that a massive change was needed in the team, specifically money, and thus announced that the driver pairing of Magnussen and Grosjean would not be racing for Haas in 2021. This effectively meant retirement for F1 for both drivers, or so we thought. But to make matters worse, during the Bahrain Grand Prix, 3 races from the end of the championship, Grosjean had a horrific lap 1 crash at turn 3, with his car being wedged between the metal barrier whilst on fire as the fuel cell was split. Miraculously, Grosjean survived relatively unscathed, with burnt hands and a cracked hood being the extent of his injuries. Haas and the FIA would not allow him to race for the remaining 2 races due to health reasons and the uncertainty of his well-being, ending his F1 career with, well, the best dad law on earth. Steiner started to come under a fair bit of criticism during the season due to the pace of the car for the past 2 years and the monetary crisis the team was under. To rectify this, he brought in 2 new drivers and intentionally decided to push all their development to the 2022 car, bringing in no new development for 2021. The drivers that they brought in were Mick Schumacher, 2020 F2 champion and son of a driver named Michael Schumacher. You might have heard of him. The other driver was Nikita Mazepin, essentially a crash out, both figuratively and literally. Although he did manage to have a decent season in F2 that year, finishing P5, he was the culprit of dangerous driving in 3 races, has hit drivers before such as Callum Milot in previous series, and around 2 weeks after being announced to drive for Haas, a video surfaced of him doing stuff I cannot say on YouTube to a woman, leading to him being the most hated driver of all time right next to Gary Brabham, before he even steps in the car. But his dad was a Russian oligarch and his fertilizer business Uralkali sponsored Haas, meaning that Haas was forced to try and mitigate this PR nightmare for 2021. As such, the 2021 car had a livery colour scheme of red, white and blue on the car. and not in the French order either. Steiner denied that this was a way to show the Russian flag colours after the world basically banned Russia from most sporting competitions following a doping scandal, forcing athletes to compete under a new flag or if they have dual nationality with their other country. So they have an American car, sponsored by a close friend of Vladimir Putin, whose son filled a seat due to nepotism worse than Lawrence Stroll. And they had a rookie who, although far better, was still very much a rookie who had his fair share of crashes.
Big man thing, yeah? It's not looking good, bruv. It's not looking good.
The first race went as well as you might expect, Mazepin crashing within 3 corners and Schumacher finishing P16. Throughout the season, Haas only got into Q2 3 times. Yes, you heard me correctly. Q2. All 3 were courtesy of Schumacher, who also had Haas's best finish in P12. Mazepin had one of the worst seasons in recent F1 history, with the best finish of P14 and at times being over 30 seconds adrift from his teammate. He never outqualified Mick on pace and only finished ahead of him twice, at the Brazilian and British Grand Prix. Coupling this with accusations from his father that Mazepin had a faulty chassis and that he would pull the plug on funding if they didn't make a new one to make Mazepin faster, left a sour taste in the mouth of everyone. The blame did have to lie on someone, and that person is Gene, for allowing an oligarch with a power complex to have such a hold in an F1 team. Haas finished P10 and last, which was expected, but maybe not in the way that occurred, finishing on 0 points for the first and thankfully only time in his existence. Progress was needed in 2022 if Guenther was to keep his job, as Haas had intentionally not developed the 2021 car to focus on the new regulations. People were skeptical of the retention of Mazepin for 2022, but that wouldn't last long, since during winter testing in February 2022, Russia attempted to invade Ukraine. This triggered a lot of condemnation and sanctions, but the most important thing that occurred was Haas announcing that their partnership with Uralkali was to be terminated, effective immediately. This meant that Haas had no incentive to keep Mazepin on the team, and a day later, Mazepin was sacked from Haas F1 team, to the relief of pretty much every F1 fan around the world. In a shock twist, his replacement would be Kevin Magnussen, whose career had a sudden revival which was liked by everyone who wasn't a Pietro Fittipaldi fan. People expected him to get beaten by Mick Schumacher, who usually took a year to get to speed in any series that he raced in, and was expected to prove that he was quick enough to eventually end up at Ferrari. Haas had turned up to the Bahrain Grand Prix with fairly high hopes of scoring points, backed up by their 10s in practice. Magnussen reached Q3 on his return to F1 with Mick in P12. Upon lights out, Schumacher was spun by Esteban Ocon but saved the car, losing only 1 place, and Magnussen made his way up to P6. Magnussen ran his own race for the majority of laps in P7, and that looked to be where he would finish. But on lap 54, Verstappen had a power unit issue and had to retire the car. Perez then had the same issue on the final lap, which meant that Magnussen would finish P5 on his return to F1. A mega result considering the pace of the car in the previous 3 years. Mick finished P11 as his hunt for points continued, but it was an emphatic result for everyone involved. Magnussen had been revitalised, scoring 15 points in the first 4 races, even qualifying P4 in the Imola sprint. The car did start to fall off for both drivers due to tyre wear issues, again, but there was a bigger problem on the horizon. Schumacher had not yet gotten up to speed and was starting to become crash and error prone. He was not able to start the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix due to a heavy crash in qualifying, sustaining 33G upon impact. He had 2 spins at Imola despite finishing P10 in the sprint, and he had a heavy crash at Monaco. His retirement at Canada was unfortunate, suffering an engine failure after qualifying P6 and his teammate finishing last after qualifying P5. So during the British and Austrian Grand Prix, it was a welcoming change of pace when both cars finished in the points, with Mick outscoring Magnussen in both races, finishing P8 at the British Grand Prix and P6 at the Austrian Grand Prix, his best finish in F1. Unfortunately, from that point, the car's pace dropped dramatically as it failed to keep up with the development from other teams, and Mick failed to score any points for the rest of the season. It was a similar story for Magnussen, losing P8 at the USA GP to Vettel on the penultimate corner. But then, something happened that no one would have ever expected.
Congratulations, Kevin, your first ever pole position in Formula 1. Describe to us the feeling right now.
I don't know what to say. I mean, it's the team put me out on track on exactly the right moment. I mean, we were the first out in the pit lane, and you know, yeah, did a pretty decent lap, and we're on pole. It's incredible. I mean, thank you to Gene Haas and you know, Guenther and the whole team for this opportunity.
What you're seeing here is why people love Formula 1. Those unexpected moments that just make you stand up and give your respect to the people that make the sport go round. Kevin Magnussen had just taken Haas's first pole in Formula 1, beating out Max Verstappen and George Russell in the wet. To this day, I don't think I've ever seen a qualifying miracle quite like that since Russell nearly took pole in the Williams at Belgium in 2021. Incidentally, Magnussen became a father 9 months later. Do what you will with that information. We moved over to Saturday with the prospect of Haas's first ever win being a possibility. Max Verstappen in the dominating RB18 was alongside him, but after that qualifying, who's to say that it couldn't happen? This is pre-2024, so the Red Bull's still overpowered. Well, at least he held the lead into turn 1 and led the first lap. Unlike somebody. He finished the sprint race in P8 and unfortunately retired from the main race after being taken out by the McLaren of Ricciardo. But it was still a crazy weekend for the Haas F1 team as they became the first US constructors to take a pole position since Shadow in 1975. For those of us who remember. Unfortunately, they were unable to finish P7 in the constructors due to the late resurgence of Aston Martin, courtesy of Vettel. They did still finish P8, an improvement over the last 3 years, but not much as an improvement as they would have liked, considering the stellar start to the season. Unfortunately, Steiner and Haas decided it was the end of the road in F1 for Mick Schumacher. In a season marred by costly crashes, poor performances and an overall lack of consistency, Guenther felt that it was too unreliable to be a long-term option for Haas. In his place would be another German, Nico Hülkenberg, the master of not getting podiums, but somehow managing to keep his career alive with consistent results. I have made a whole video on why his career has stayed alive, please give it a watch. Many people felt that this decision would hurt them in the long run, as they assumed that Hülkenberg was washed due to his less than ideal standing for Vettel at Aston Martin in 2022. On paper, it was actually a strong and reliable 2023 lineup that should produce results in pretty much any car, which makes 2023, and its consequences for Haas, all the more surprising. For 2023, a new title sponsor was announced for Haas, a banking company by the name of MoneyGram. Luckily, this company is actually legit and not owned by someone tied with Putin, so it was hoped that the money would be used to build on the progress that had been made in 2022. Little did they know, this would be arguably Haas's worst year in the sport, for reasons I will go on to explain later. I think the best rate that encapsulates the state of the VF23 would be Hülkenberg's Canadian Grand Prix. In an amazing show of pace, Hülkenberg had qualified P2, the highlights of Haas's 10 Q3 appearances. However, Hülkenberg was damaged from the beginning, not because of the 3-place grid penalty for impeding cars in Q2, but because of Haas's worst enemy, especially in 2023, tyre degradation. Hülkenberg went from starting P5 to being out of the points in the space of 7 laps, a feat often repeated multiple times through Hülkenberg's 8 Q3 appearances that season. He only managed to score points twice, through a P6 at the Austria sprint courtesy of Hülkenberg qualifying P4 and briefly overtaking Sergio Perez for P2 before dropping back, and a P7 at Austria, which, had the red flags not been called up before Verstappen reached Sector 1, would have been a first podium for Haas and Hülkenberg due to Sainz's penalty. On Magnussen's side of the garage, things looked even worse, only managing to score 3 points finishes, all P10s, and reaching Q3 twice. His pace during 2023 was subpar, either due to the car or himself. There were many attempts to fix the VF23, with upgrades for the summer break in Austin, but they didn't rectify the tyre issues that left them unable to defend against the majority of the grid. This culminated in a 10th place finish, 4 points behind Alfa Romeo. For Jean, this was the final straw. He felt that drastic changes needed to be made for 2024 if things were to improve. Thus, on the 10th of January 2024, it was announced that Guenther Steiner's contract would not be renewed and that he would leave the team, effective immediately. Jean cited that this was down to performance, telling F1 pundits that it was down to performance, and that they had gone over 160 races without claiming a podium. He didn't explicitly blame Guenther, but he said that this felt like an appropriate time to make a change and to try a different direction, because it didn't seem like continuing with what we had was really going to work. He finished his statement with, "At the end of the day, it's about performance. I have no interest in being 10th anymore." Guenther took the sacking quite well, stating that this was an opportunity to spend time with his family and evaluate his options within F1. He ended up writing a book in 2024, aptly titled Surviving to Drive, and is still seen at F1 races from time to time. The real question is, how did his replacement fare in 2024? And was Jean really justified in sacking Guenther? Steiner's replacement for the team principal role came from a promotion within, the trackside engineering director, Ayo Komatsu. Komatsu had worked in F1 since 2005 with BAR as a tyre engineer and then moved to Renault in 2006 as a performance engineer. He was then promoted to race engineer in 2011, briefly working with the GOAT, Vitaly Petrov, before working with Grosjean in 2012, forming a partnership that would score 10 podiums. When Grosjean moved to Haas, Komatsu fled with him, becoming the trackside engineering director until 2024, when he was promoted. So, how has he fared this year? Well, to be quite honest, Haas have had their best year on track since 2018, with a car that actually doesn't kill its tyres. The car has managed 18 points finishes courtesy of the brilliance of Hülkenberg in his final season at Haas, and Magnussen stepping up because he no longer has a seat for next year. Plus, Ollie Behrman single-handedly getting himself a seat at Haas despite being outside the top 10 in F2. Haas have finished P7 in the championship, only a couple points from Alpine. And to be honest, they should be P6 considering how bad that Alpine was at the start of the season, but Alpine's resurgence is even more crazy than Haas's, so let me know if you want a video on that. It has been a remarkable turnaround, with the best finish of P6 achieved by Hülkenberg in back-to-back races, coupled with the strong qualifying pace of Hülkenberg, reaching Q3 16 times. Haas's uptake in form has been staggering, but is that down to the leadership and the work of Komatsu, or was he just riding the wave of success that Guenther had built prior to his departure? We will only truly find out what Komatsu can do in 2025, but for now, it's been a flying start for Haas under his leadership. To be completely honest, it's still far too early to tell, but the early signs are good. Haas seems to have fixed their tyre deck problems, hopefully for good now. Their pace has vastly improved from previous seasons, and with a reliable title sponsor, things look to be on the up. But of course, we can't just go ahead and write off Steiner as a bad manager and say that it was deserved because he was sacked just because Haas are in a good bout of form. If you remember, Haas experienced the same thing in 2018 and then they had their worst period as a team for 3 years. There is no guarantee that Komatsu will not experience the same thing. But with the return of Toyotas to the F1 fray, Haas certainly seems to be in a better position, and with a younger lineup of Ocon and 19-year-old Ollie Behrman, it does seem that Gene made a tough decision for the greater good of Haas F1 team. Guenther has a great personality and built Haas up to the highs of the upper midfield table, but too many recurring issues and mistakes led to a drastic change needing to be made, and that led to his eventual firing. So in my opinion, it was harsh, but Gene was right in sacking Guenther Steiner. That's just my opinion though. What's yours? Let me know in the comments down below. I will try and reply to everyone. That's all from me today. Let's push for 1K. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. Have a great day. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and goodbye.